Good morning. As Leah said, my name is Michael Poulos, and I'm one of the chaplain interns here at Charles George. I'm here today to share a brief reflection as part of our Transgender Day of Remembrance service. Though the International Day of Remembrance is officially held next week on November 20th, I still think it's appropriate for us to be here today. This is the National Transgender Week of Awareness, and I'm speaking today as a chaplain as well as a parent of a transgender child. When Leah invited me to share, I was struck with a contradiction. On the one hand, today's service witnesses to the tragic reality of violence experienced by many individuals in the transgender community, hate crimes of violence that have led to the tragic death of the 22 people we will remember today. There is so much loss for us to mourn. For many of the names that will be read today are young people, most of whom are young trans women of color. On the other hand, my family's journey with our transgender son has been an extremely positive one. Born to us with the biology of a girl, our second child claimed his gender identity in high school and has successfully transitioned as a happy and healthy 18-year-old who is thriving as a freshman in college. His experience has been very different than many LGBTQ young people who face bullying, potential violence, and an alarming rate of suicide. As I have sat with this contradiction for this past week, I have felt several things. One is gratitude. Gratitude that in some ways we have come a long way in our society in the past 20 years. Remember, it was 20 years ago in November of '98, the murder of a transgender woman named Rita Hester. That was the event that began this movement to have a Transgender Day of Remembrance. Since that time, we have grown as a society in understanding better the relationship between our biological sex, what we're given when we're born, our gender identity, which is our internal sense of where we fall along the continuum of being male or female, as well as our gender expression, the way we present ourselves to the world. Through education and access to resources about gender identity issues, families like mine have been able to understand better the science behind the facts of gender diversity. I'm grateful for the local doctors and counselors and school officials here in Buncombe County who were able to support my family in making this transition with our son 3 years ago. With their help, my wife and I learned about gender dysphoria. That's the clinical diagnosis of what it feels to be trapped in a body that does not match your gender identity, does not match who you are at your core. Dysphoria is the condition that leads to depression and sometimes suicide in an alarming rate for gender variant kids. As a person of faith who believes that all of us are created in God's image and that all of us by grace are God's beloved children, I am especially grateful for the courage my son had to claim his true identity. In talking to other transgender friends and allies who have supported us along the way, I know that our son's experience would not have been possible 20 or even 10 years ago. With a growing awareness and acknowledgement that all people are created equal and can serve openly in society and in the military without discrimination and bias, we are moving to a time of more and more understanding and acceptance. And although there are occasional political forces and voices that seem to serve as a backlash to the progress we're making, the moral arc of the universe continues to bend towards justice. So as I've been thinking about this contradiction, between my family's positive journey and the harsh reality experienced by so many others, I've realized that as a parent of a transgender son, it has been hard for me to embrace the harshness that is out there. To be honest, I have not wanted to face the possibility that my son too can be a target for hate and violence. The hate and violence that ended the lives of the people that we're remembering today. A local nonprofit called Transmission here in Asheville holds a remembrance service each year on November 20. And you can see the details about this at the end of your bulletin. It'll be held next Tuesday in Pritchard Park. However, I honestly don't think that I have attended one of these services since my son transitioned 3 years ago. And I realize now it's because of my fear. Honestly, I find it hard to come to terms with the fear that this reality could affect my son, and that my son too might become an object of hate. He too might become an object of bullying or something worse. Being asked to speak here today has helped me to name and to claim my fear as a parent, a fear that many people know too well. We do live in a broken world where acts of hate and violence can devastate any of us. None of us are safe at school, at work, or in our places of worship. This year already, we have had over 300 mass shootings in our country in about as many days. But as horrific as violence can be when you're injured as a bystander, today we remember those who have been targeted by hate. By definition, a hate crime is one motivated by racial, sexual, or other prejudice. And while it may be tempting to deny or ignore the reality of hate, we know all too well that those of us working in the helping professions, doctors and nurses, psychologists and administrators and pharmacists, all of us here at this hospital are called to be part of the healing of the world. But how can we do that? What can we do day to day? Well, I believe our first step is this. It's not to be held captive to the fear of violence or hate, but rather it's to take the risk and to open up our eyes wide so that we can see its impact in the world. Reading the names and learning a little bit about the 22 transgender deaths this year is one way that we can open up our eyes. But it should not end here. We need to become educated. We need not to only open up our eyes, but we also need to open up our minds to learn about things that we may be unfamiliar with. If you don't know much about gender identity questions, then find ways to learn from others. If you don't know much about a certain ethnic group or religion and you've only heard negative things about them, then let's break out of our bubbles and attend a different place of worship. Find ways to connect with people who are different than you. This is especially true for those who are rooted in privilege. As a middle-class, white male, heterosexual, cisgender person coming from the Protestant faith tradition like I am, I believe that the responsibility is on me to take the initiative to learn from others who have a different experience of the world than I do. The privileges that I take for granted every day, like walking alone at night in my neighborhood because I just feel like I need to get some air. This is a privilege that many people who live in the margins cannot experience without risk. Though I thought I was rather an open-minded person when it came to issues of LGBT inclusion, I have learned so much from others who have helped me to understand what it means to live outside my bubble that I believe is simply normative. Finally, in addition to opening our eyes, and opening our minds, I believe we're called to do one last thing, to open up our hearts. In light of the hate and evil that seeks to destroy those who live on the margins, we are simply called to be people of love. No matter what our religious tradition, no matter if we consider ourselves to be spiritual but not religious, or totally secular, agnostic, or atheist, love is the universal goal for us to strive for. Love is the power that drives out fear. And once we overcome our fear, we can begin to see the other for who they are. Someone different than us, yes, but someone who is equally worthy of respect, dignity, and yes, love. So as we prepare to remember the transgender lives who have been lost this year to violence, may we come with our eyes wide open, our minds open as well, receptive to learning more about those who we may label as other. And most importantly, let us come ready to give and to receive love.